It was a cold evening in New York City, the kind of night where the wind cut through layers of clothing, sending shivers down the spine. The streets bustled with people, businessmen in tailored suits rushing to catch cabs, couples strolling arm in arm, and street vendors selling roasted peanuts and pretzels under the glow of flickering neon lights. The city never slept, but for some, like Emma, it wasn't a place of endless opportunities. It was a battlefield of survival. Emma, just 14 years old, sat on the steps of an old, worn-down building, her thin jacket barely shielding her from the cold. Her small fingers, reddened from the biting air, clutched a torn notebook and a nearly dried-up pen. She had been carrying them for weeks, yet tonight, something pushed her to finally use them. The pages were wrinkled, some smudged with past teardrops, a testament to the nights she had spent dreaming of a way out of the cycle of hunger and exhaustion. She hesitated for a long moment before pressing the pen to paper, her heart pounding as she wrote. Dear Mr. Trump, my name is Emma. I'm 14 years old, and I don't have a home. My mom always told me that asking for help is a sign of weakness, but I don't know what else to do. I just need $100, enough to buy some food, and maybe a safe place to sleep for a few nights. If you help me, I promise I'll find a way to pay it forward someday. She stared at the words, the ink bleeding slightly into the paper as she gripped the notebook tighter. Doubt crept into her mind. Would he even see this? Would he care? He was one of the richest men in the world. What was $100 to someone like him? But to Emma it was everything. Her stomach growled, reminding her why she had taken this risk. The last meal she'd eaten was a stale sandwich 2 days ago, given to her by a kind stranger who hadn't even asked her name. Her mother had always taught her to be strong, to fend for herself, but her mother wasn't here anymore. She had disappeared one night, leaving Emma to navigate the world alone. She carefully folded the letter, pressing down on the creases, as if that would make her words more powerful, more convincing. Finding an envelope had been a stroke of luck. She had dug through discarded papers near an office building until she spotted one that wasn't too torn. It wasn't perfect, but neither was her life. She scrawled the address of Trump Tower, her fingers shaking slightly. Standing up, she took a deep breath, the icy air stinging her lungs as she approached a nearby mailbox. She hesitated, staring at the rusted metal slot. Once she dropped a letter inside, there was no taking it back. Was she making a mistake? Was she just another desperate voice in a sea of millions? She bit her lip and whispered, "Please," before letting the envelope slip from her fingers. It landed inside with a soft thud, disappearing into the darkness. She had no phone, no internet, no way of tracking what would happen next. But she had something even more valuable, hope. And that hope was about to set off a chain of events that would change everything. Because when Donald Trump read that letter, his response wasn't what anyone expected. It left the world completely stunned. Before we go any further, if this story already has you hooked, make sure to like this video and subscribe. You won't believe where this journey leads next. Days passed, and Emma had almost convinced herself that she had made a mistake. The chances of Donald Trump ever seeing her letter seemed impossibly slim. After all, he was one of the most powerful businessmen in the world. He had skyscrapers, hotels, and businesses to run. Why would he notice one small, crumpled envelope from a girl who had nothing? She spent her days wandering through the city, searching for warmth in libraries and subway stations, and hoping that some kind stranger might spare her a meal. At night, she curled up in the corners of shelters, listening to the distant hum of traffic, wondering if there would ever be a way out of the life she was trapped in. Each morning, she checked the street-side mailbox where she had dropped a letter, half expecting it to still be sitting inside, rejected by fate. But deep down, a small part of her refused to give up hope. The days blurred together, and with every passing moment, doubt crept deeper into her mind. What if no one had even opened the envelope? What if it had been tossed aside, buried under a mountain of more important messages? She tried to push the thoughts away, but they clung to her, heavy and suffocating. Maybe she had been foolish to believe that a man like Donald Trump would ever care about a girl like her. Then one evening, something happened that she never expected. A sleek black car pulled up in front of the shelter she sometimes stayed near, its tinted windows reflecting the dim glow of the streetlights. The vehicle looked so out of place in this part of town, standing out like a diamond among stones. For a moment, Emma thought it must have been a mistake, that someone important had taken a wrong turn. The door opened, and a sharply dressed man in a dark overcoat stepped out. His polished shoes clicked against the pavement as he took a few steps forward, scanning the area as if searching for someone. Then his gaze locked onto her. "Emma?" His voice was firm but not unkind. Her heart pounded. She had spent most of her life avoiding people in suits. They usually meant trouble, but something about the way he said her name made her hesitate instead of running. "Who are you?" she asked, her voice wary, her body tense. The man reached into his coat and pulled out an envelope, holding it up for her to see. Her breath caught in her throat. It was her letter. "You wrote to Mr. Trump," he said. And he read it. Emma's legs suddenly felt weak. She had prepared herself for silence, for the possibility that her words had been swallowed up and lost forever. But now, standing in front of her was proof that she had been heard. The man gestured toward the car. "He wants to meet you." Emma hesitated. This was the kind of moment that could change everything. But it could also be a trap. She had learned the hard way that trusting people could be dangerous. She took a step back, every survival instinct screaming at her to run. "How do I know this is real?" The man nodded, as if he had expected her hesitation. He pulled out his phone and tapped the screen a few times before turning it toward her. It was a video. On the screen, Donald Trump sat at his desk, the city skyline stretching behind him. He held up her letter and spoke directly to the camera. "Emma, I read your letter, and I want to help. If you're willing, I'd like to meet you and hear your story in person. The man standing in front of you works for me. You're safe with him." The video ended, but Emma barely breathed. This wasn't a scam. This wasn't a trick. Donald Trump, the billionaire, the man whose name was on buildings all over the city, had read her words and wanted to meet her. A lump formed in her throat, and she looked back up at the man. "Where are we going?" "To Trump Tower," he said simply. "He's waiting for you." Emma glanced down at her worn-out sneakers, at the ripped edges of her sleeves, at the dirt smudged on her hands. She had never felt more out of place in her own skin. The thought of stepping into a world so different from her own was terrifying. Would they look at her like she didn't belong? Would she be turned away at the door? Her stomach twisted. But then she reminded herself she had nothing to lose. She had spent her entire life being overlooked, unheard, invisible. And now, for the first time, someone important had listened. She took a deep breath, forcing her feet to move forward. Because whatever happened next, her life was never going to be the same again. Emma had never felt smaller. The towering golden doors of Trump Tower loomed before her, a stark contrast to the cold streets she had called home for as long as she could remember. As the car pulled up, her fingers gripped the fabric of her worn-out hoodie, her nerves threatening to consume her. She had never stepped foot in a place like this. Marble floors that gleamed under crystal chandeliers, men in tailored suits moving with confidence, as if they had never once worried about where their next meal would come from. The vast difference between this world and hers was overwhelming. The man who had picked her up led her through the grand lobby, past rows of people who barely spared her a glance. She saw their polished shoes, their designer bags, their conversations filled with business deals and luxury. Would they know just by looking at her that she didn't belong? Before she could get lost in her thoughts, They stepped into a sleek elevator, the walls lined with mirrors that made her confront her reflection. She barely recognized herself, her tangled hair, her patched-up sleeves, the tired eyes of someone who had spent too many nights on the streets. The elevator chimed, and the doors slid open. "He's waiting inside," the man said, motioning her forward. Emma's heart pounded in her chest as she stepped into a large office filled with floor-to-ceiling windows, the city stretching endlessly below. And there, seated behind a massive desk, was the man himself, Donald Trump. He glanced up as she entered, setting aside a stack of papers. He was like the untouchable figure she had seen on TV. There was no camera, no flashing lights. Just a man who had built an empire, now looking at a girl who had nothing. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then, with a gesture, he motioned to the chair across from him. "Come, sit." Emma hesitated but moved forward, sinking into the chair, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. "I read your letter," Trump said, his voice firm yet steady. He leaned forward, studying her with the same intensity he used when making billion-dollar decisions. "Tell me why you wrote it." Emma swallowed hard. She had imagined this moment 100 times, but never thought it would actually happen. She started, then stopped, trying to find the right words. "I didn't write to ask for a handout. I wrote because I wanted a chance, a real chance to change my life." Trump nodded but said nothing, waiting for her to continue. "I grew up thinking that people like me don't get those chances," she admitted, her voice quieter now. "I've seen how the world works. Money stays with money. Power stays with power. People like me, we don't get seen." She looked down at her hands, ashamed of the dirt under her fingernails. "But I thought maybe, just maybe, someone like you would listen." The room was silent. Then Trump leaned back in his chair, his fingers steepled together. "Emma, let me ask you something." His tone shifted, becoming more direct. "If I handed you $100 right now, what would you do with it?" Emma blinked, caught off guard. The request had been in her letter. But now, faced with a question, the answer wasn't as simple as it once seemed. "I wouldn't waste it," she said firmly. "I wouldn't buy things that disappear in a day. I'd make it count. I'd find a way to build on it, to turn it into something more." Trump studied her for a long moment, as if weighing her response. Then, without breaking eye contact, he opened a drawer and pulled out a crisp $100 bill. He placed it on the desk between them. "But here's the real question," he said. "If I gave you something more than this, an opportunity, would you take it? And would you work for it?" Emma's breath caught. "Yes," she said immediately, her voice unwavering. "I'd do anything for a real chance." Trump's lips curled into a small smirk, the kind that signaled he had already made up his mind. He pressed a button on his desk, and within seconds, an assistant walked in. "Get Emma set up with an internship program. Business training. Let's see what she can do," he instructed. Then he turned back to Emma. "I don't believe in handouts, but I do believe in people who refuse to stay down. You say you want a chance? Here it is. Don't waste it." Emma sat frozen, her mind struggling to catch up. This wasn't just $100. This was an open door to a world she had never thought she'd be allowed into. A lump formed in her throat, but she swallowed it down. She couldn't cry, not now, not here. Instead, she stood up and met Trump's gaze with steady determination. "I won't," she promised. And for the first time in her life, she truly believed it. Emma had barely processed what had just happened. One moment, she had been just another face in the crowd, struggling to stay afloat in a world that rarely noticed people like her. The next, she found herself standing at the doorstep of an opportunity most could only dream of, an internship that had the power to change her life forever. But with that opportunity came expectations pressure, and an overwhelming sense of responsibility. She wasn't just representing herself anymore. She was proving that people like her, people who had started with nothing, deserved a chance too. Her first steps into the towering office building felt surreal, a stark contrast to the worn-down neighborhoods she had always known. The polished marble floors gleamed under bright lights, reflecting the fast-paced energy of professionals who walked with purpose, their tailored suits and confident strides making her feel like an outsider. It didn't take long for her to realize that she was in over her head. The conversations around her were filled with industry jargon she barely understood. The work culture moved at a relentless pace, leaving no room for hesitation. She sat in her first meeting feeling like an imposter, clutching a notepad and trying to keep up while executives debated multi-million-dollar decisions as if they were discussing the weather. The weight of doubt pressed on her shoulders. Every moment felt like a test. Every interaction, a silent evaluation. She overheard the hushed conversations of skeptical colleagues, their words laced with quiet judgment. Why is she here? She got in through luck, not skill. I'd give her a month before she quits. She wanted to fight back, to prove them wrong, but self-doubt gnawed at her. Maybe they were right. Maybe she was out of her depth. Maybe she wasn't meant for this world of high-stakes negotiations and billion-dollar deals. But quitting wasn't an option. Instead of giving in to fear, she made a decision. If she didn't know something, she would learn it. If she was behind, she would catch up. If she wasn't the smartest in the room, she would be the hardest working. While others clocked out at 5, she stayed behind, poring over reports, watching tutorial videos, and scribbling notes late into the night. She asked questions, even when it made her feel foolish, because understanding was more important than pride. She studied patterns, numbers, and decisions, trying to see the world through the eyes of those who had built empires. Each passing day, the puzzle pieces started to fit. Then, one night, long after the office had emptied, she found herself alone in the conference room, the glow of a desk lamp illuminating stacks of reports. The exhaustion in her bones told her to rest, but the fire in her heart refused to let her stop. And then, a voice cut through silence. "You're still here?" She turned to see Trump standing in the doorway, his expression unreadable. He wasn't known for small talk, and he certainly wasn't the type to hand out praise without reason. "I wanted to go over these reports again," she admitted, straightening in her chair. "I need to understand them better." Trump stepped inside, placing his jacket over the chair beside her. Most people would have given up by now. Emma met his gaze without hesitation. Most people don't get second chances. For a moment, there was nothing but silence between them. Then, a small smirk tugged at the corner of his mouth. "Good," he said simply, "because the real test hasn't even started yet." The next morning, Emma was called into a high-level meeting. It wasn't just another standard briefing. This was different. The air was thick with tension, and she quickly realized why. A massive deal was on the line, one that had the potential to generate millions but carried significant risk. The executives, seasoned professionals with years of experience, had hit a wall. Something wasn't adding up in the financials, but no one could pinpoint what was wrong. Trump turned to Emma. "You've been studying. What do you see?" The room went silent. The eyes of every executive landed on her, some skeptical, others amused. This was the moment they had been waiting for, proof that she was in over her head. Emma felt her pulse quicken. This wasn't a drill. She had spent weeks preparing, immersing herself in numbers and strategies. And then she saw it, a mistake, a small but critical miscalculation that could shift the entire outcome of the deal. She took a breath and spoke. "This number here," she pointed at a key financial projection, "doesn't factor in the upcoming market fluctuation. If we move forward as planned, we'll be in the red within 6 months." A murmur ran through the room. One of the senior analysts immediately double-checked the figures on his laptop. Within seconds, his expression shifted from skepticism to shock. "She's right," he muttered. "We overlooked that adjustment." Trump's smirk deepened. He turned back to Emma. "Looks like you just saved us a fortune." The weight in her chest lifted. For the first time, she wasn't just the intern who got lucky. She had contributed. She had mattered. But she wasn't done. Taking a step forward, she cleared her throat. "I think I know how we can fix this," she said, her voice steadier now. Trump leaned forward, intrigued. "Then let's hear it." At that moment, everything changed. She had stepped into the fire, and instead of being consumed by it, she was proving that she belonged. The room had gone silent. Emma had just done what no one expected. She had not only caught a mistake that seasoned executives had overlooked, but she had also proposed a solution. And the most shocking part? It worked. The deal was salvaged, the numbers realigned, and for the first time since stepping into this high-stakes world, she felt something she hadn't allowed herself to believe before. She belonged here. The skepticism that had once filled the office faded. The same executives who had doubted her just weeks ago now greeted her with nods of acknowledgement. Some even came to her for advice, asking her input on reports and projections. She had earned her place, not because of a lucky encounter with Donald Trump, but because of what she had done with the opportunity that followed. Trump himself took notice. One afternoon, as she reviewed financial forecasts in the corner of the office, his voice broke through her concentration. "You remind me of someone," he said. She looked up, slightly startled. "Who?" He smirked. "Me. A long time ago." Emma wasn't sure how to respond to that, but before she could say anything, Trump continued. "You see the game for what it is. You don't wait for permission. You don't back down. That's how you win in this world." He crossed his arms, watching her carefully. "So what's next for you?" It was a question she had been asking herself ever since she walked through those doors. She had come in as a girl who needed a miracle. Now, she was someone who understood how to create her own future. She met his gaze with newfound confidence. "I want to build something of my own one day." Trump grinned. "Good answer. Then consider this just the beginning." Weeks turned into months, and Emma's role expanded beyond what she had imagined. She wasn't just an intern anymore. She was a key part of the team. She absorbed everything she could, from high-stakes negotiations to strategic investments, always pushing herself further. She studied every move the executives made, watching how they handled crises, how they turned obstacles into opportunities. She noticed the patterns in decision-making, the subtle shifts in tone that signaled confidence or hesitation. Every day was a lesson, every conversation a chance to learn. Her work ethic didn't go unnoticed. More and more, her name was brought up in meetings. Senior executives began to trust her insights, seeking her opinion before finalizing deals. She was no longer an outsider trying to prove herself. She was now part of the discussion, shaping decisions that had real impact. Then one day, an envelope arrived at her desk. Inside was a letter, a formal job offer, full-time, executive training program. Emma stared at the paper, her heart pounding. She had walked into this building as a desperate girl asking for $100. Now, she was being offered a career, one she had fought for, one she had earned. That night, she visited the diner where it all began. The booth she had once sat in, nervously clutching a crumpled envelope, now felt like a different lifetime. She slid into the seat and ordered a coffee, letting the moment sink in. She wasn't just surviving anymore. She was building a future. A few minutes later, the waitress placed a steaming cup in front of her and smiled. "Looks like things worked out for you." Emma smiled back. "Yeah," she said, gripping the cup. "They really did." As she sipped her coffee, She realized something. It had never been about the $100. It had always been about what she was willing to do once she got her chance. She thought back to the fear she had felt that day, wondering if she was making a fool of herself, if asking for help had been the wrong decision. But now, with the weight of her accomplishments settling over her, she understood something far greater. Courage wasn't about knowing the outcome. It was about taking the step anyway. And now, she was just getting started. Her dreams were no longer distant, abstract ideas. They were real, tangible goals within reach. She wasn't the same person who had once hesitated before knocking on Trump's door. She was sharper, bolder, more determined. As she sat in that diner, the scent of fresh coffee filling the air, she made herself a silent promise. This was only the first step. There was still so much more she was going to achieve.